Welcome to today's Advocate Virtual Town Hall. I'm Andrew Mull, AARP Louisiana Director of Advocacy. AARP is the nation's largest nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to empowering people to choose how they live as they age. We work to strengthen communities and advocate for what matters most to families with a focus on health security, financial stability, and personal fulfillment. We know healthcare, insurance, utilities, and prescription drugs have hit your pocketbook hard. That's why AARP is your wise friend and fierce defender and brings common sense solutions to the table so you have a fighting chance to protect your finances. We hope you'll enjoy today's discussion regarding the impact of the 2024 elections on Louisiana and a look ahead to the 2025 legislative session.
Good morning and welcome to today's special panel discussion brought to you by The Advocate and AARP. I'm Kim Holden, and it's my pleasure today to host this insightful event where we delve into the economic landscape and the legislative outlook for Louisiana as we approach the 2025 legislative session. Today, we are joined by a distinguished panel of experts who bring a wealth of knowledge on Louisiana politics and policy. With us are Tyler Bridges and Stephanie Grace, seasoned journalists who've got their fingers on the pulse of Louisiana's political scene. Also, Dr. Pearson Cross, who is the director of the University of Louisiana Monroe School of Behavioral and Social Sciences. He is an expert in local and state government, redistricting, elections, and education reform. Now, today, our discussion will explore a range of topics, including economic forecasts and legislative priorities, and we aim to provide you with a comprehensive preview of what to expect in the upcoming months and how these developments could impact the people of Louisiana. So let's get started. We're going to dive into our first topic of the morning. Thank you all for being here. We certainly appreciate it. We're going to start with looking towards the 2025 legislative session and the key issues that you believe will dominate the agenda in Louisiana. Tyler, let's start with you.
Sure. So the way the legislature works is that 2025 will be what's known as a fiscal session, meaning they can deal with tax issues in ways that they can't deal with in even number of years unless there's a special session. So that's the first thing we should be thinking about is what are they going to do in taxes, and that has something to do with what they just did on taxes in the special session that just ended. So my guess is there might be some tweaks to the tax laws of the things that were done during the special session that just ended. That's one thing that we should keep an eye on. Also, something on the education front, the big issue in 2024 was the conservative legislature and the conservative governor passed education savings accounts, giving people, families money, public dollars to send their children to private schools in a much more expanded way. Now, that bill was watered down from what the original sponsor wanted to do. That bill was watered down in the Senate. It's not clear how much money is going to be available. So there could be an effort by some members in the House to try to resurrect the original version of that bill and make sure they got enough money for that. Another bill, or another topic that we should take a look at next year, Kim, will be on insurance. That's a big issue on everybody's minds, particularly homeowners insurance. It's not clear at this point exactly is there a solution to that. Another thing to look at is very soon there's something called the Revenue Estimating Conference, which is a state body that meets every so often to see how much money is available, how much tax revenue is coming in. And when that board meets next, that will determine exactly how much money the legislature and the governor will have to spend next year. And that will also help determine what happens in the 2025 legislative session. Of course, they want to have more money to come in and gives the legislators a free hand. Speaking of taxes, an issue that has come up before is try to create a centralized tax system collection where instead of having individual tax collectors in all the different parishes, it would all go into a central location. This is something that sheriffs where the tax collectors in their parishes have opposed.
Right.
It was on the ballot a couple of years ago, almost was approved, but that is a sort of a, quote, good government measure to expect as well. So I think those are probably the top things we should be looking at in the 2025 session.
Okay, Stephanie, any other key issues?
I would add it is a fiscal session, but also there are a limited number of other bills that can be considered. So we might see other issues that individual legislators bring up, or perhaps Governor Landry pushes. He's been so aggressive in his first year in terms of really kind of upending government in a lot of ways. So I would not be surprised to see some more proposals from him that would maybe focus on kind of centralizing his appointment power. That's been a big theme. Also criminal justice, kind of, taking a harder line on crime. In terms of insurance, as Tyler mentioned, I think something that I am expecting to see is an attempt to expand the fortified roof program that already exists. It's a set of grants, basically, that people can apply for. They're very competitive. It's kind of a lottery system, and a lot of people have tried to get them, and it enables people to put stronger roofs on their homes that insurance companies will hopefully give them a break for. So I know that they are looking at trying to expand that.
And I
Okay.
would say there's a couple other issues. I think the governor's next big project that he's going to tackle is the Department of Transportation. And so I would expect he's going to come out with some sort of plan sometime soon, and then there will be legislation during the fiscal session in 2025 to enact those changes that he wants to see. And I'm guessing there'll be involved some level of privatization of the Department of Transportation. And one other issue, and this came up during the special session that just ended on taxes, the governor was trying to eliminate various tax incentive programs. For example, the film production tax credit, also the tax credit for the investment in historic properties. Those tax credits were saved by the legislature, but Susan Bourgeois, the director of Louisiana Economic Development, was saying that she wanted the legislature to give her a whole new set of tools, a toolbox, to try to introduce incentives in a more streamlined and directed
because
way.
they did eliminate other incentives that did exist.
And it's still
other than those
possible they
two.
could eliminate the film tax credit or the historic properties tax credit and replace it with whatever she's coming up with.
Okay, and Dr. Cross, do you have any key
Yeah,
issues that you're looking at?
Well, I just wanted to say, this is really, Jeff Landry's turning out to be a really activist governor, and he's tackling all these issues. I mean, his first year in office had three special sessions, and then the legislative session. And he's got a Republican supermajority in House and Senate. So I expect him to go after this fiscal session that's coming up in a big way. So one thing, I think he's going to look at what he's done already and then see how far he can push it down the field in terms of getting more done. The other thing is, I think he's going to be playing off the Trump administration, which is incoming. So I would expect to see some activity in the area of undocumented immigrants, for example. I'd expect to see more kind of culture war issues as things heat up there.
He hasn't been shy on those.
No,
Yes.
and then some stuff on the coast. So I think there are a number of issues, as Stephanie pointed out. Each legislature gets to introduce, I think, up to 5 additional bills that are non-fiscal in nature. So I think they would be using a lot of that freedom to go after some of those issues.
And one more thing that I think he'll play off of with the Trump administration is this DOGE idea, which he has already kind of nodded to in a general sense, and that is just a real reduction of government, which is interesting because that really isn't what he's pursued, despite the fact that he is a conservative Republican.
But he is facing people on the right saying, hey,
We want that.
You made all these changes in the tax code. Well, we're paying too much taxes. Government's too big. So he's
Yeah.
going to have to probably provide something for those folks.
And, Governor Jeff Landry and the legislature did make those sweeping changes in the state's tax structure during the 3-week session that ended in November. Tyler, what was the most significant change that would impact seniors who are living on a fixed income?
Right. Well, the first thing is to understand that the changes that affected everybody was House Bill 10, which was a reduction in individual income taxes. Louisiana is going from a graduated 3-tier individual income tax rate to a flat tax of 3%. And at the same time, the standard deduction for individual filers is nearly tripling to $12,500. So that's going to affect everybody, including seniors. At the same time, to help pay for that, the state sales tax is going to go up to 5%. Louisiana already had the highest combined local and state sales tax in the country. Now it's going to be even higher. So seniors and all of us, when we go purchase goods, will be paying a higher in sales taxes. Now, there is one specific element in the tax changes that would benefit seniors. And that's going to be on the ballot on March 29. This will be a proposed constitutional amendment, and that would double the standard deduction for seniors. So whereas individual filers would get $12,500 on the legislation just passed by the legislature, if this amendment were passed in March, it would go up to $25,000.
And I think it's important to say that you don't get to vote just on that. It's a very wide-ranging amendment, and that is one of the elements that's in it. So you can't just kind of...
And that's not by accident.
Yes, it is.
One of the things about seniors is seniors come in all varieties of economic health. So you have people who are not doing very well, not having much income, and other people are quite well heeled. And so the changes that Tyler just spoke to, if you're doing well, if you have an income of $1.8 million a year, the tax that you would get that you wouldn't get is over $15,000.
Yeah.
If you're at the bottom part of that spectrum, and you don't make very much money, you might actually pay more in sales tax than you get back in terms of an income tax relief. So it hits different groups differently.
That's a good point, Dr. Cross.
And one thing that did not pass that would have affected seniors is there was a proposal to eliminate sales tax on prescriptions at the local level. They're already exempt at the state level, and that was going to be part of a trade for some other things, and it did not go through.
Okay.
So
Stephanie,
maybe we'll see it again.
How do you see the economic policies discussed in the upcoming session impacting the average resident of Louisiana, not just the seniors?
The upcoming session. Well, I think we don't have the agenda yet. I mean, so much policy was just pursued in this special session, and then, as Tyler mentioned, we have a very wide-ranging constitutional amendment coming up in March. So,
I would just say that go back to this tax package that the legislature just passed. Remember, the governor said that Louisiana, if it passes this tax package, will begin seeing a much more investment, job creation. The state will begin to reverse the population loss that occurred during the years of John Bell Edwards. What the governor didn't note is that actually median family income, which is what he has said is one of the metrics to show whether his tax package is working, actually median family income rose during the years of John Bell Edwards' governorship about the same as the national average. But again, the governor's bet is that this tax package is going to really boost the economy.
Yeah, and one of the things they were pursuing was for Louisiana to kind of get better ratings from these agencies that rank how business friendly states are. And, Louisiana is expected to get somewhat of a boost, maybe not as much as a boost as it would have gotten if the whole tax package had gone through. But, that's a pretty indirect measure when you look at how it will affect people's lives, right?
Right.
And I don't think we'll know very soon. I think it's these are long-term decisions that companies make where to invest. And yes, they look at tax policy, but they also look at quality of life issues and education and all kinds of other things.
And Dr. Cross, in terms of economic policy, what strategies do you believe the state needs to adopt to address the challenges of job growth, education, health services?
Well, as Stephanie just pointed out, part of it is tax policy, part of it's a friendly business climate, part of it is but a large part of it is an educated workforce and providing the kinds of things that make a region dynamic. So if you look to the models that certainly our governor and we've looked to for a while, Texas and Florida as states that are booming, that are gaining population and so on. It's a interesting recipe, but as an educator, I have to say both of those states have fantastic public education systems that routinely far outdistance Louisiana. So from my point of view, I think building some strength in particular areas in education would be a great move for the state of Louisiana.
Anybody else want to chime in on that?
Well, there's sort of a chicken and egg, right? What comes first? Do you invest more in education? I think the governor and the legislature's attitude as well. We need to create an environment where there'll be investment that will create jobs, that will increase tax revenue so we can spend more money on education. Would you agree with that?
I don't know that they want to spend more money with education. We'll talk about education later, but my guess is that the governor would like to move education into private and take the state out of a central role and maybe have it be more of a supportive role and bring down. I mean, right now there's some commonality between what we were bringing in state income tax and what we were spending on education. And I think Governor Landry would probably like to flip those and say, well, let's take all that money we're spending on education and use that in the budget.
And certainly they're not putting very much more money for early childhood education,
Right.
even though everybody agrees that that is a great investment in the future.
That would be very targeted. And that goes back to some of the other things that in one of the special sessions, there were some changes of John Bel Edwards' criminal justice reforms, and it's just been shown that if you spend some of this money in early education and criminal justice reform and early intervention, then you save a whole bunch of money later on. And I'm not sure that the state of Louisiana is doing that right now. I think we're trying to wave the sign to companies saying, yeah, we're open for business.
Yeah.
I'm not sure states are going to buy that if we don't have the infrastructure and don't have the great place to live.
And kind of another piece of that is with these changes that were passed last year, we will be locking more people up, and that is very expensive. So more money will be going towards that.
Exactly.
But that does seem to be something the public wants.
Yeah. Well, the public oftentimes, and this is the thing that drives people crazy, is that people who do polls and stuff, is the public wants contradictory things, right? And so they want more education, but they want lower government spending, and they want to get tough on criminals, but they don't want to spend so much on the
Right. And they believe in giving people a second chance. And
so it's tough.
Okay, let's talk about redistricting and elections, and how do you think the changes in district lines might influence the upcoming elections, Dr. Cross?
Yeah, this is so interesting, right? Because, Jeff Landry really figured out that he had to get a second majority minority district. Certainly the federal court system was telling him no. After what they did in Alabama, where they popped him on the wrist and said, no, you have to create that second majority minority district. So Louisiana apparently got the news, and so this was something that Jeff Landry pushed. One of the interesting things about it is that he used that incentive from the federal government to pay off one of his political opponents. So Garrett Graves, who was the most popular Louisiana congressman, reelected with 80% of the vote in 2022, decided not to run for reelection in a new district that was created specifically to elect majority-minority representatives. So it's interesting how politics and redistricting interact in that.
there's nothing more political than redistricting.
Exactly. And Tyler, what are your thoughts on the recent trends and how that might affect the political landscape overall in Louisiana?
There's two parts of redistricting. As Dr. Cross mentioned, there is the redistricting involving Congress, and that has now led to the election of Cleo Fields, a black Democrat, to replace a white Republican, Garrett Graves.
Who is an ally of the Republican governor, we should add.
He's quietly maybe an ally of the governor.
Are we not supposed to say it out loud? Okay.
But then there's also the legislative redistricting that people can forget about. That Judge Shelley Dick in Baton Rouge said that the maps that drawn by the legislature, by the House and the Senate, were violated the Voting Rights Act. And on January 7th, the appeals court is going to hear oral arguments on her ruling. So it's possible that in 2025, the federal appeals court could rule that the lines drawn by the legislature for the House and the Senate did indeed violate the Voting Rights Act, and that could lead to new elections.
And at the same time, I believe there are still some legal action on the congressional districts going forward. So there is that new map that's in place, that was in place for this election. It might not be 2 years from now.
And Cleo Fields, you remember, Stephanie, was elected to Congress in 1992. And then in 1996, the federal court said, sorry, the district you've been elected to represent was illegally drawn, and he had to give up his congressional career, and he was later got into the state Senate. And now Cleo Fields is back in Congress after the redrawing of lines that we've just discussed. But it is possible, right, that the Supreme Court could end up saying, hey, Louisiana, actually, that district, those boundaries that you drew in 2024 are illegal, and it's possible that Cleo Fields could be knocked out of his seat again.
It is, yeah. And then, the other piece of it, this isn't redistricting specifically, but it happened during the special session that was called for redistricting. We went to party primaries in certain elections, not all elections, not legislative and state elections, but congressional elections. And we're already seeing the result of that because Bill Cassidy, Republican U.S. Senator, is up 2 years from now. He's already got a Republican opponent, John Fleming, the state treasurer. And that really is kind of a result of the fact that there will be a Republican primary for the first time. So there is the idea of a face-off between the kind of MAGA wing of the party, which John Fleming would represent, and the maybe more traditional Republican wing, which Bill Cassidy represents. So that's going to be really interesting to watch, too.
Okay. Tyler, can you elaborate on the constitutional amendment that will be on the ballot in March? Just what are the key components of the amendment, and what are the implications that it might have for the way government is run and the citizens of Louisiana?
Sure, Kim. So just to avoid confusion, make sure everyone understands the changes that legislature made during the special session in November. Those are now law, which is collapsing the individual income tax to a flat 3%, reducing the top rate of the corporate income tax to 5.5%, eliminating the corporate franchise tax, which is a tax on the net worth of big companies, and also raising sales taxes and lowering how much the government can spend on the film tax credit program and the historic property tax credit. That's all law now. But the legislature also passed a bill giving us, the voters, a chance on March 29th to make major changes to the state tax code. And I think there's basically three of them. One is to eliminate 3 education trust funds and take that money and that's being freed up to, I'm pausing how to say this because a lot of people are saying this would lead to a $2,000 raise for teachers. It actually the money would replace the stipend or short-term increase that teachers have gotten in pay to a permanent $2,000 pay increase. So that's one element, and we're going to hear a lot about that in the coming weeks And then another one is, as I mentioned earlier, would be the doubling of the standard deduction for seniors, meaning that more money of their income would be exempt from individual income taxes. And then the third part is that there's something called the inventory tax. It's a tax levied, a property tax levied by parishes on companies, and it's a very controversial tax. Businesses don't like it. And parishes, if this amendment passes on March 29, parishes will have the option to opt out of continuing to collect this inventory tax.
Okay, yeah, that's...
Tyler, can I ask a question? Are those 3 separate constitutional amendments?
They are all one constitutional
That
amendment.
violates the
nothing.
Constitution, because the Constitution says that you're only supposed to pass one item at a time.
It only violates if some judge determines
decides
that happens.
It's like those are 3 separate
Right.
things. I don't see how you...
And there's actually much more in there. There's kind of, the idea of taking out some things that are in the Constitution and putting them in statute, which means that the legislature can change
There are
them more
various
easily.
exemptions,
Right.
property tax exemptions, although not the homestead exemption. That would not be touched. Those would be taken out of the Constitution and put into statute. And statute means the legislators could make the change themselves without having to go to the voters. Another element that's in the March 29th amendment would be in the future, if you wanted to add a tax break, that would require a higher threshold by the legislature. And so there's a bunch of different things that are all in one amendment.
And isn't there something that would kind of limit the amount of growth on government spending on recurring items? I think that's in there
that's something
too.
that was put in there for conservatives who think government is too big. And so there's what's called a spending cap
kind of,
on annual spending. That's another element in a very complicated a single amendment that's on the ballot on March 29th. And, talking about seniors tend to vote more than others. So seniors will have a particular say in whether to approve that amendment.
Right.
And I think we're going to hear a lot from the governor and TV. He's going to raise a lot of money from his wealthy donors to pay for the TV ads and other types of ads to get voters to approve that amendment.
And, the fact that it does include this teacher pay raise, however you want to define it, is kind of a sweetener to voters. So we will hear a lot about that because that's very popular. People need to remember it's that plus all these other things.
But they really need to be educated on this too, because
So
it sounds like
educated.
it's a huge
It's a monster.
Yeah, it's a catch-all.
Yeah.
The other thing is if it faces challenge or if it should go down, then that might be a topic to be taken up in the regular session.
Yeah,
So-
no matter what happens, whether it passes or fails, that will lead to some amount of legislation because that's March 29th, and the special session starts a couple weeks later.
Yeah.
I mean, the
let-
regular session
Regular
starts a couple weeks.
Regular
couple
session.
weeks
Okay,
later.
so a hot topic, homeowners insurance.
Yes.
Stephanie, you know a lot about
Been
this.
following this since Katrina very
Yes,
closely.
retirees and seniors are struggling to pay their homeowners insurance. Massive increases have happened,
Yeah.
cutting into their fixed incomes. So many people are just really finding it impossible to pay this with their
Sure.
Social Security income. When will the bills passed during last year's session begin to show relief for homeowners? Any idea?
If they do, I mean, it's a big if. What Tim Temple, the insurance commissioner, came in with Jeff Landry, so a little over a year ago, came in with a very distinct model that he wanted to pursue, which was deregulation. Basically say there are constraints on insurance companies that don't necessarily exist in other states. If we if we make it more competitive, if we basically say you don't have to, for example, keep somebody who's been with your company for 3 years. That was a rule that was only in Louisiana. It's now been repealed. The ability to raise rates more than once a year, things like that, that would be appealing to companies. So a lot of people are kind of like, well, how much do we want to give to companies? But the idea is it would make them want to do business here. So has that happened yet? It's really too soon to say, and it's not any, there's nothing else really the legislature can do on that front for the most part. There are some, remaining issues over kind of how litigation works, but it really is time for the market to speak. And, a lot of that depends on what the insurance companies, how they want to pursue this, how much risk they want to expose themselves to, and also what happens with hurricanes. We did have the 2 big hurricanes at the end of the season this year. Has the cost of that kind of filtered through the system yet? I don't think it has. So, the answer is we don't know.
But we are hearing a lot about fortified roofs.
We are hearing a lot about fortified roofs because that's kind of a more direct way of helping people. It does, the idea is that you are supposed to get a break. It's not a specific break the way, like in Alabama, there's a certain percentage off your bill that's required. The Louisiana legislature didn't do that, but the companies are supposed to give people who get fortified roofs a break. There are these grant programs. The state is encouraging people, even if they don't get a grant, to put on a fortified roof because, with the idea being, it would lower your bill. And, what Tim Temple says is there's actually, if a kind of a critical mass of people in a community get these fortified roofs, it can affect the pricing in that community too. So it really is something that is very popular. And, there is hope that this could address the problem. And this, the state is looking for ways to expand it.
But as you said, there is only a limited amount of the
Very
of the
limited,
grants.
yes. So very few people have gotten them, and then they're still kind of going through the process of actually getting them. So we have not really seen the effect of it in a widespread way. At
Stephanie's
this
the expert here. Anybody else want to chime in on the homeowners insurance?
She can handle
and
it.
seniors?
She's got it.
Okay,
Okay.
good. All right. Dr. Cross.
Hang in there.
You're an expert on education reform and in the legislative discussions. What are your insights on that? What changes or initiatives do you see on the horizon?
Well, we've been changing education in Louisiana really since Bobby Jindal, and every governor comes in and wants to take a big swipe at education. So this can go back as far as you want to go. But since Bobby Jindal was in office, we've been moving towards these kind of conservative education ideas, and that is that we want dollars to follow children. We want to increase the ways that money gets to parents to provide for their child's education, voucher programs, charter schools, any kind of strategy like that is the strategy that is in fact welcomed and sought out, and I think that's done. So what Landry did was he remade a bunch of the gender reforms and kind of created his own version of it. And it passed. It was very popular. The problem is, of course, to do that, it's very disruptive, and it costs a lot of money. And so right now, it's limited to the opportunity to get scholarships and vouchers, so to speak, is limited to people within certain income brackets at a fairly low level of expenditure. If we expand that, though, it could really get up and swallow the budget. So, estimates, I think Arizona is spending close to $900 million on this program.
And there's been research, hasn't there, that, a lot of that money is going to families where children already are in private schools.
That's the thing. The idea is that, you take, the state's spending a ton of money, like $3.8 billion, let's get the right one, $1 billion on education. So why not take that money and just let the parents decide where they want to spend the money assigned to their child? And of course, we know that's very problematic in how that all works, because affluent parents tend to go after these kind of things. Less affluent parents tend to not do that. Kids who are in affluent households, we know are getting lots of extra help already. Kids who are in less affluent households maybe are not getting that guidance. So one critique of this is it just a boon, just a gift to the people who are already doing pretty well? So if you're already got your kid in an expensive private school, is the state just saying, well, we want to help you with that payment? And most people think, well, that doesn't sound very fair, while people who are less affluent don't have those opportunities.
Yeah.
But we do have a Republican governor and a 2/3 Republican legislature,
Right.
as you mentioned earlier, Dr. Cross, and so they're probably going to push these ideas even further in 2025, right?
I mean, one interesting element of it, though, is that in a lot of rural areas, the public schools are the biggest employer. They have a lot of political power,
Big time.
too. So those are a lot of conservative areas. So that's interesting.
There are two other things here. One is that BESE, Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, is now going to be, is one of those institutions that now is going to have primaries, party primaries, so you may end up with very partisan kind of members on the Board of Education. The other thing is there's a bunch of culture education that affects, culture legislation that could affect education. And we've seen that with
10 Commandments.
10 Commandments and don't say gay, LGBT kind of pronoun issues, and critical race theory being banned. And Governor Landry's already taken, signed some executive orders about all that stuff. So I expect to see more of that.
Okay, let's turn the spotlight back on us and talk about media coverage, Tyler. As media coverage of local and state government evolved in recent years, how has it evolved, and what impact do you think it has on public perception and policymaking, if any?
Yeah, I started covering the Louisiana Legislature in 1989, 1990, and what was called Press Row in the basement of the Capitol. There's like 8 different offices, and they were all filled with reporters. And even going back years, I was talking to someone the other day, said in the 1983 governor's race, the Opelousas newspaper had one reporter covering former Governor Edwin Edwards and one candidate covering David Treen.
Wow.
These days, there's really maybe one office that's filled in Press Row in the Capitol, and that's the Advocate. The Louisiana Illuminator also does some good coverage, but there's an incredible thinning of the ranks in coverage of state government. And it's not just Louisiana. This is a national trend. And on the local, there's fewer and fewer, I think, reporters. The other day, I was in Alexandria. The Alexandria Town Talk used to be a robust local newspaper. I think they have 1.5 reporters now.
Wow.
And one of the reasons the Advocate has moved into with a digital edition in Shreveport, Bossier City, is that the Shreveport Times is basically, I think they're down to like 1 reporter. So now robust coverage for folks up in Shreveport, Bossier is provided by the Advocate digitally.
And Dr. Cross, you're in Monroe.
Yeah, well, Greg Hilburn is the person for the Gannett papers, and there are, I think, 5 or 6 Gannett papers around the state, including the Shreveport Times and the News Star in Monroe, and the Town Talk, I think, is a Gannett paper. But
Right.
there
Lafayette, yeah.
Yeah, Lafayette. But there used to be, I remember the days of John Hill
Yeah.
and his partner Mike
Haston.
Haston. So, like, Tyler would say, you would go in the basement of the Capitol and you go in that office and there are 2 full-time reporters there covering the Capitol. And now, gone. And instead, there's this, what amounts to a stringer, Greg Hilburn, who comes down on, special occasions and covers the entire state for the paper. So
And to go to the second part of your question, Kim, I believe that what we do is important for democracy
Yeah.
by educating people about what's going on. Keeping an eye on our elected officials, I think they do a better job if they know that we are being watchdogs, if we're looking over their shoulders. And I think it's not a good thing if there are fewer of us doing that, being watchdogs, and also if don't have the same opportunity to tell the public what's going on.
But do you see that trend going back the other way? It's come so far.
Well, the one thing I'll say about the Advocate is that we have a pretty robust news operation, I think, compared to newspapers of a similar size, right, Stephanie?
I think it's better in Louisiana than in a lot of state houses because we do still have this, a real bureau with multiple reporters. And we're covering 4 different markets, Lafayette, Baton Rouge, New Orleans, and Shreveport. And, there's also this, the kind of new element is nonprofit online organizations, and that like the Louisiana Illuminator that Tyler mentioned, has a very strong presence there. So that's kind of an added element that we didn't have years ago. But I guess I'd add, we're facing some of the same issues that we're hearing about nationally, politically, which is people kind of going into their silos and lack of trust of media and, debate over what is a fact. And all of that affects us at the local level, too.
Yeah, and I would make the argument, I'm a booster of my newspaper, that our job is to cover Democrats, Republicans, and no party/independents. And I get called back from all of those different people from those different political parties. And that's important for us to do because we're not presenting a right-wing agenda. We're not presenting a left-wing agenda. Stephanie, you have a point of view, but you just wrote a column praising Garrett Graves, who's a Republican, about how he should get a job in Washington. And I hope these people watching the show are subscribers to The Advocate because we do provide good news every day online and also printed newspaper as well.
Good little plug there, Tyler.
Got to get that plug in there.
Yes, indeed. Okay, so as your perspective as experienced journalists covering politics, what are the most contentious topics that you see or you anticipate will emerge from this 2025 legislative session?
I mean, the culture wars are always contentious. And again, the governor and this current legislature does seem to kind of have a taste for those. And they are in this supermajority situation. Republicans are, so I think we'll continue to see more of that. It gets headlines, and even this isn't legislation, but Mike the Tiger, like all of these things that kind of get people talking that maybe are not about like nuts and bolts of policy, get a lot of attention. The crime stuff is still very hot, and I think probably, Landry is not done with what he wants to do on that front. And then teacher pay raise is always a big issue, and a lot of people have a stake in that, obviously.
If I could jump in, just one of the things that's been a constant in our state for a really, really long time is that the Senate acts as a moderating presence. So there are 2 institutions, the House and the Senate, and the House comes up with all kinds of crazy things. And then usually the Senate, which oddly enough is made up of people from the House most often, it gets to the Senate, and the Senate tends to say, nah, that doesn't sound quite right, and they cool it out and they act as a restraint. So we've seen some of that in this current, some of these special sessions and in the first regular session.
Yeah.
So I expect to see some of that. I'm hoping to see some of that, some of this restraining elements of the more wild.
And it's interesting because kind of the key figure there is Cameron Henry, who is
Exactly.
the Senate president, who did come over from the House. And when he was in the House, he was maybe a little bit of a, he was more like other House members. He kind of was very contentious, had a very contentious relationship on a lot of issues with Governor John Bel Edwards, who was a Democrat. He's over in the Senate now. He's the Senate president. And he is the one who has really kind of been, I think, a realist in terms of what the state can afford, what can get through the legislature, finding a way to kind of compromise to get some of the governor's agenda, even if all of it's not going through, really at a sophisticated level. And, one thing I kind of think is happening is that these people who did come over from the Senate, they've been through it before. They went through the last fiscal crisis, Bobby Jindal into John Bel Edwards. They kind of know what can happen. So the experience does matter.
And Stephanie, you remember that when John Bel Edwards, who was a Democrat dealing with a majority Republican legislature, and the cry by the Republicans was, we need to be independent of the governor, because traditionally the governor had picked the Speaker of the House and the Senate president. And Governor John Bel Edwards didn't get a chance to do that because he was a Democrat and they were Republicans. So the Republicans are saying, finally, we have an independent legislature. But we've seen with the House this year that the House of Representatives under Jeff Landry has not been independent. They've given him everything he has wanted. But as you've talked about, Stephanie, just now in the Senate under Cameron Henry as its president, the Senate has acted as an independent voice, giving the governor a lot of what he wants, but certainly not everything.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I just want to give all of you just one final little say about the legislative outlook, some final words as we wrap this up for the viewers, what to expect, and maybe any fireworks that we might see.
Me first? Okay. Again, I think the most interesting person in Baton Rouge is Cameron Henry because, he, I think, more than anyone will determine what the legislature does and what it doesn't do. And he is trusted by Democrats, Republicans, different factions within the Republican Party, because that's a really important dynamic right now. Once you're the majority party, then you have the big tent problem. You have people with different points of view in there. And, I find it fascinating the extent to which he's been kind of a moderating force in this kind of one-party system at this point. So more of that.
Keep an eye on Cameron Henry.
Yes.
Dr.
I
Cross.
think keeping an eye on economic development kind of issues, I think really Jeff Landry, there are recently 2 huge data centers coming. I think Jeff Landry's looking at that as like feathers in his cap, and he wants to move in that direction. So I think there's going to be a lot of action in that area. And I think he's very tied in, as you know, he's really good friends with Donald Trump Jr., and so I think there's going to be a lot of interaction between the national, the federal government, and the state government. So I wouldn't be surprised to see some sort of joint economic initiatives, tried out introduced during this session, or things like that.
And of course, remember, we have the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader in Congress, so we have some powerful
Exactly.
people there too.
Yes, we do.
Exactly.
Tyler?
Yeah, I would go back to something that Dr. Cross said a few minutes ago about Jeff Landry being an activist governor. And I think back to what he told me in an interview I did earlier this year, marking his 100 days in office. And he says, he told me that he doesn't want to be slow moving. No, he's been a
not.
fast moving guy.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
don't know exactly what's going to be on the agenda in 2025, but I don't think it's going to be something slow. It's going to be something pretty big and pretty fast.
If I could follow up just quickly with that, it's unclear. He's been moving so fast and had so much on the agenda and got so much done early on. It's unclear if it's going to settle into a rhythm. I keep waiting to see, is there going to be a rhythm to government under Jeff Landry, or is it going to continue at this breakneck pace? It's unclear right now.
Fun to watch.
Yes.
Absolutely.
We'll do this again in a year.
Yes. Tyler Bridges, Dr. Pearson Cross, Stephanie Grace, thank you so much for your expertise and your insight into the 2025 legislative session on what we can expect. I am Kim Holden. Thank you so much for joining us today.